Here's the deck. Hopefully you can see it. This is our little program we're doing called Hang with Spang. And my name is Ash. I'll be hosting. So this is our very first one. We have a whole slide here that tells people who we are. Maybe I don't need to read all of this, and certainly Spang today, one of our big reasons to even come here is to get to know you better. So I'll just start out by maybe just giving you a chance to just do like a very the one sentence self intro, and we'll do deep dives in just a second.
Yeah, well, thanks everyone for tuning in, or if you're watching this later through the recording, hi as well. I'm Christine Spang. I'm the founder and CTO here at Nylas. I started Nylas 8.5 years ago, and it's been an incredible journey getting here. My rough background is really coming out of open source, and I have a software engineering degree from MIT, and really got into entrepreneurship through that. So that's probably the short version, and we can chat more about the details in a bit.
Oh, we will. Definitely we will. But thank you so much. And hey, everybody, I'm Ash. I'm recently joined Nylas. I'm in my third week, and I'm here to lead developer relations. And our DevRel team, we're building it now. We're going to be here to make sure that folks who build on Nylas have a great experience. Actually, since I get a chance to have a bit of a bully pulpit here, I'm just going to say that DevRel is hiring. So we're looking for developer advocates, community leaders for technical communities, and also content professionals, again, for technical content. So join us. If you can't click that link, just check Nylas.com and go find the careers page there. Love to talk to people who are passionate about developer relations and building developer communities.
Yeah, super awesome for us to be kicking off the DevRel program here at Nylas. It's a thing that we've wanted to have for a long time, and we're looking for the right person. And Ash is that guy, and we like to give people the fire hose. So week three, we're on the air.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm excited about that. But thanks so much for having me, and I'm really excited to be able to jump in and do some stuff like this already. I'll note just for the folks who are either watching this live or maybe later on. Well, first of all, the webinar is being recorded, so if you're watching this later, you already know this. But for other folks, like if you need to jump out earlier or whatever it is, this is going to be recorded and it will be made available later. And also, there are questions in a Q&A function, or you can ask questions in the Q&A function here in Zoom. And we definitely want to hear from you. So if you have questions, great. We'll try to get to as many as we can. But please share your questions as we go. And by the way, if you're watching the recording, or if you're here live and you think of something that you want to hear about from Spang at another time, reach out and let us know, because we're always going to be looking for future topics to cover in different places. So we certainly want to know what's on your mind. So questions and comments, totally welcome. Okay, so today, we'll say that we're going to start out with this agenda and we'll see where we go, but we want to talk about Spang's origin story and a bit about co-founding Nylas. And if we can, I want to get into some timely kind of things related to, it's the end of the year. So kind of looking back on 2021, as well as maybe a few predictions. Both Gleb and Spang, co-founders in Nylas, recently wrote this awesome blog post covering 2022 predictions. And we might try to get into a bit of those towards the end. But this is roughly what we're planning on doing. So as our last sort of item of housekeeping before I stop sharing my screen, here we are again. Just want to say thank you. Follow us on Twitter. Spang is @Spang, easily enough. Mine is at @AshRyan_IO. And if you want to learn more about Nylas and try a free trial, check out this link. I think this will be shared in the chat, and dashboard.nylas.com/register. So with that, maybe we can get into it, and I will stop sharing my screen here, and here we are. So Spang, just before we get into any sort of deep background stuff or whatever, just where are you joining us from today?
I am joining from Toronto, Canada, from the 34th floor of a hotel that looks out over Lake Ontario. Fun fact, I was originally born in Toronto, or back in the day, this part of Toronto, what's now Toronto, called Scarborough. I think when I was born there, it was technically a separate town, but in Canada, if you get too big, they just amalgamate things into the city area for tax purposes and things like that. So I just say Toronto these days. And another fun fact is that Nylas has a ton of employees in Canada and in the Greater Toronto area at this point. So we're having a holiday party for the team here on Friday, so I came out for that, and I'm also going to double dip and visit my family for the first time since before this whole pandemic thing started. So really excited to be here, and luckily the internet is also very good in this hotel.
Yeah, for hotel Wi-Fi or internet, I don't know if you're on a wired connection, but it's pretty awesome. This is one of my big worries whenever getting on a call from a hotel room is this even going to happen? That's so cool. You get to go visit your family. I think like it feels nice that while there still is a little bit to be concerned about as we travel around, like we're certainly getting to do that more. I actually myself got to go a couple of weeks ago when we met for the first time, got to go to the San Francisco holiday party, and then a week later do the same thing in New York where I'm based. So yeah, maybe this is a good opportunity just to cover like where's Nylas's footprint geographically?
Yeah, for sure. So we've grown a lot in 2021. We started out the year at about 120 employees, and today we're 250 or a little bit more than that. And I don't think we've added any new countries to our footprint in 2021, but we've expanded a lot within those countries. So we're in 21 states across the United States at this point. We're in 4 provinces in Canada, which, if you're not from Canada, there are more than 4 provinces in Canada. But not that many more. They're quite big, lots of land, not so many people. And we also have folks in the UK and in Ireland and in Amsterdam. So 2 years ago, we really didn't have anyone in the EU. And in fact, our Canadian presence started in kind of spring of 2020. So before the pandemic, we didn't have anyone in Canada either. And I very much remember that winter doing a lot of paperwork to launch our Canadian entity and a lot of back and forth with Canadian banks and things like that. And for example, having to figure out how do I get documents notarized during the early part of the pandemic when everything was fully locked down, you couldn't go anywhere. And it's like, I can't just go to the post office to get this notarized so that we can open this Canadian entity. Got to figure out something else. And it turns out, you can just pay, a roving notary to come and help you sign your docs. And it's an essential function because, lots of things require notarization to keep going. So it was a whole adventure.
The notion of a roving notary, I guess that's sort of like a seamless rub hub for folks that can like come check your documents. It's an interesting notion. So yeah, there's so much more I want to dive into in terms of like the company's trajectory and all that kind of thing. But I think that we're going to push that maybe for another day, unless we kind of come back a little bit later when we look at 2021, see how that's been for Nylas. But I thought actually like really is, as part of like one of our first chats like this, I really wanted to take a moment just to learn a bit more about like what I mentioned on the slide earlier is like your origin story, right? So you and I got to chat a little bit about this, and I'm just curious, what got you into, an interest in computer science? It seems like you were doing some of this stuff from a very early age, even before college. And I'm just curious, like, I always love to hear those kind of stories. And I think a lot of people out there who are maybe looking to get into the field are often curious about like what are the different backgrounds and what are the different sort of threads that people initially pull on to sort of like build not only the skills, but even more the passion as they go for computer science.
Yeah, for sure. Just to give a little more history about myself, my family, my grandparents were all born in Norway, and basically my grandfather and my grandmother moved to Canada I think in like the 70s when my mom was, growing up. And my grandpa was a chemical engineer, and he studied at the University of Trondheim, which is kind of the MIT of Norway. And he was looking at different job opportunities. There was an opportunity in Canada. There's a lot of mining operations, or at least there were in Northern Ontario. And that's why they ended up moving to Canada, and how I ended up, being born in Canada. And I didn't actually grow up there. My family moved to upstate New York when I was pretty small. So first generation in multiple ways of being in North America. But my grandfather was a chemical engineer. I have a bunch of uncles who are in various flavors of technology, software engineering. And I was really good at math and science in school, but I had this general idea that I would tell people I wanted to be an engineer when I grew up, which is a very broad desire. You being an engineer is like you could build bridges, or you could build, conditionals. The idea of being an engineer is just that you build things in the world. And so obviously, starting out being really into math and science kind of led me to that. But really converged on software for me in high school when so I was also really avid reader when I was a kid. I read a lot of fantasy novels, more fantasy than science fiction, but the underlying theme was just wanting to sort of escape and explore new worlds, and being a teenager, wanting to get out of my suburban boring life a little bit through books first. And then I really kind of translated that desire into computer games, specifically sort of very kind of adventure style exploration type games. And I got really into this kind of games called MUDs, or multi-user domains or dungeons, which are basically text-based games where you explore a world, you create a character. Some of them are very kind of, fighting oriented, where you gotta, kill monsters and level up. But the sort of flavor of these games I got really into were really focused on role playing. So you'd spend a lot of time creating, your character's backstory, and then in the world you would really kind of play out that character's life. And so I got really into this role-playing intensive game called that was based off of the Lord of the Rings. And essentially I got so into this game that I started helping run it, first through helping craft storylines and things like that, and building parts of the world using the in-game building tool set. And then eventually I wanted to be able to do more, to make more fundamental changes to the game. And all these game engines were written in C at the time, really old. They were built in kind of the 90s and early 2000s. And you would connect through a MUD client, which under the hood, it was Telnet. So basically on the back end, these were server applications that were written in C. And it was basically like network programming using C. So I remember I got a copy of the this guy Beej, Beej's Guide to Network Programming for Unix, and the Kernighan and Ritchie C book.
Yeah, that's right. You showed me that. I think that we shared the other day. I had gone through some of that myself at some points.
And so I started I went to public school in upstate New York, and so there weren't really any computing courses at my school, but through this kind of side hobby obsession, I started learning to program on my own. That's basically how I decided the software thing is really cool. I want to be a software engineer, not just an engineer.
So in addition to I think a lot of times when folks are getting into computer science, programming or coding initially, I think there's a certain aspect of well, I just made something from nothing, even if it's something super basic, like that first time you print a line and you're like, okay, you start to build out little things here and there, and it's very motivational in that way, where as you progress, you start to feel, okay, I'm making things, small things and then bigger things and bigger. So there's that sort of part of it that you get that sort of intrinsic motivation from digging deeper. But I'm also curious, like, was there any community aspect to your trajectory from that early age that really, like, did you have a community that you were plugging into, or people that were like kind of encouraging to move along, or was this mostly like a kind of solitary activity for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely multiple aspects of that. One, just, the group of people running this game were really tight knit. We had like a sort of imagine IRC, but like a separate game channel that was for just the admins talking to each other, and whether that's about stuff that was going on in the game or things that we were planning, things like that. There's this like admin chat, and I made friends with the other folks that were helping run the game. And then I don't think I would have gotten very hardcore into sort of the software side of things without the communities around open source. So really, at the end of the day, I got into programming through following my curiosity and seeing where it led. Like, basically, the game engine ran on Linux, and I grew up with a Windows machine. I mean, I didn't even have my own computer. It was like the family computer. But eventually, after hogging the family computer for one too many nights, my parents agreed to buy a computer to put in my room. So I was able to install Flavor of Linux on that machine. And I got really curious about, like, where does this Linux thing come from? And so I tried to read online all about it. And I ended up reading the developers' blogs. There was this big phenomenon in sort of open source communities at the time in the late noughts, early 2010s, where they'd use this piece of software called Planet, which took a bunch of RSS feeds and combined them into one mega RSS feed. And then you'd have like also a web page that just had interleaved all of these people's blogs with particularly this, I can't remember what they were called, but these round sort of head logos where people would use open source software, like this program called the GIMP, to make the background go away. And so, your hair would be popping out, and, it was just sort of a floating head of you. And each blog post would have that avatar for each person who was the author of that post. And so I started reading these developer blogs, and eventually, at one point, there was a woman who contributed to this flavor of Linux called Debian, who posted a post on her blog about a group that she was a part of called Debian Women. And the post was basically a call to join. She's like, we want more people who are women to contribute to Debian Linux, and we have an IRC channel. Hop on, we'll help you get started. And this was basically how I got involved in those open source contributions, because I saw myself in what she was describing. Seeing sort of like a feed of beardy white dudes from around the world, it's like, yeah, this is interesting, but it didn't feel like me. And I think that you really need to be able to imagine yourself in a community. So even if it had not been a woman making this post, I think having the explicit call for people of different, looks and backgrounds and genders to come join, and being explicitly welcoming, really made the difference for me to show up on IRC, and people were super welcoming. And also, when I got sort of really into programming and I started applying to colleges, because of being involved in these open source communities, I decided that I really was interested in going to MIT as like one of the places where kind of open source was born. So it kind of became this dream school for me, but I was really intimidated about applying. It sort of seemed like such a huge stretch that maybe I shouldn't even try, And that person who had made that blog post, I had formed a friendship with her, and she really encouraged me to apply. And so I'm not sure I would have gone to MIT if I hadn't had that encouragement, because I wouldn't have applied. And I probably still would have ended up in software at that point, but my life would have looked really different. And I think going to MIT also led to a series of events that got me into entrepreneurship. So it's really cool to just look back on, my story and how I got here as being this sequence of semi-interrelated things that led to the outcome that it did. But if any one of those things was missing, maybe it would have turned out differently.
Oh, it's so fascinating. And like that, all it took was, one person to, come out and say something encouraging and inclusive to really kind of change the trajectory of like a person, like in this case, your life. And that's an amazing thing to have happen. I mean, kind of jumping in, and you said like the Debian community was quite welcoming. And, from there, it was like, you felt like maybe it was a stretch, or might have thought it was a stretch to go to MIT because it probably seemed like a different type of person was primarily there. And like, so I'm just curious, like, once you got on the other side of all of that, like, what did it take for you to start to be able to, like, are you cognizant of that, like throughout your time at MIT, for example, or in the Debian community as being a woman, or do you have to keep that front of mind, do you feel like, or were you able at some point to get to a level of acceptance where you were able to move past that? Because I think hearing a story like that is useful, because I suspect a lot of people kind of look from the outside in, if you will, and wonder, like, how do you get to this point where you are just doing your thing? So I'm just curious, like, are you at that point? Were you able to get to that point through those experiences?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, MIT is a pretty special place. They have thought about this for a long time and really invested in making the student body more diverse and inclusive. And that really affected my experience there. For example, when I was at MIT, the student body was pretty close to 50-50 male, female. I think maybe it might have been 55-45 or something like that. But once you get past, 30 or 40% female, like you stop feeling like you stick out. So that made a big difference to being on campus and not, feeling like you were someone different. And, they also gave me, for example, the most student aid of any school I applied to. And so they have like a big merit-based, student aid program to make it affordable so that you don't have to graduate with a massive debt load, which is also really important for, setting people off on an even playing field. So I don't feel like gender was super present for me during college. It was more so after leaving. And I would say that within the different departments, definitely like different majors had different sort of breakdowns in gender. Like I think computer science, or at least at MIT, it's grouped together with electrical engineering. So it's electrical engineering and computer science. I think that whole department is about 30 or 35% women. So still enough to be, to not, feel like super different. But there's other majors like biology, which were just majority women. So just an example of how overall things are super balanced, but then within different departments, you might have different experiences. But I still don't really feel like it was super omnipresent for me during college. But after leaving, there became more times when, I was the only woman in the room sometimes. The startup I was at before this, I think there were 2 women. And the funny story is both of these 2 women went on to found their own companies and
Wow.
are now high-level leaders in those companies.
Wow. So
I do think that speaks to how well, the male leaders in that company were allies. I always really felt supported by them. And, I was, for example, I was vegan for 7 years in my 20s. And at the time I was at this previous startup, I was vegan, and we would go out and celebrate major company milestones by getting really fancy dinners in Boston. And no matter the restaurant, they would always go out of their way to make sure that I would have a fully vegan meal. And these were really nice dinners. And so, this was like, getting the 5-course, upscale chef's meal, made sure it was vegan and that there was, an equivalent meal for me there. And that's just an example of the kind of support that I felt like I could get from these folks that I used to work with. And they actually ended up being the first angel check into Nylas. The founders of this company that I worked at beforehand, this company called K-Splice, which did a bunch of Linux kernel engineering stuff. And so I really feel that it's super important to have those allies, and that even if there's so many factors that influence, whether you're the only X in the room, and especially with tech, it is the case that as you get higher and higher in sort of seniority within tech, the diversity is less. There's fewer women at higher levels. And so becoming a founder, and for example, being on a board of directors, being at startup events, things like that, especially as the CTO, it's often the case that I may be the only woman in that room. And I wouldn't say I super think about it a lot these days. But I also feel like it's been definitely a journey in terms of building up confidence to feel like I belong there.
Yeah, and I was struck. I think it was earlier this morning actually. I was watching your I guess you'd call it like almost like a small panel talk at Web Summit. I think you were sitting down with, and I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but she was from, is it ThinkWorks? ThoughtWorks, yeah, thank you. But yeah, I thought that was like it's one of those things where, for better or for worse, it really jumped out at me. I was like, great, this is like two women in high level leadership positions talking about how to scale engineering teams, like, and that's awesome. Like at the same time, I guess like we're still in a phase where sometimes like that sort of makeup of a panel can also really jump out to you as being like, oh wow, this is not the same thing I'm used to seeing at a conference,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And things are changing. They're going to continue to change, but there's just so much debt that like it's not going to be at the case where there's necessarily parity for a long time. And I think in many areas there may never be actual sort of 50-50 sort of balance. But the important part is developing that inclusive attitude and knowing how to be an ally to people who are different from you, and knowing how to developing communication skills around talking to people who have had different experiences and bring different assumptions into conversations, and may act and think and react differently from people like you.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's a conversation I'd love to have with you another, like when we can really dig into it. I mean, I've at one point been on a team where the head of people was saying something to the effect of like diversity and inclusion almost feels like as a term backwards, or because I think from his point of view anyways, if you're not building an inclusive environment in the first place, you're not going to get to diversity, which I think is a really fascinating topic. Yeah.
But we can dive into that more in the future. That'd be fun.
Yeah, it would be. And I think I still got like so much I want to learn in that realm as well. But you just mentioned earlier, like kind of making that move from, at some point MIT to being part of a startup to being, to co-founding Nylas. Like, what was the trajectory there? What was the path exactly from kind of like I guess you graduate school, you went on, sounds like, to the startup, but just wondering, what was your path?
Yeah, so I got my undergraduate degree, and my default plan was actually to stick around MIT and do a 1-year master's, which is an option that's given to all undergrads if you meet a certain GPA requirements and you find someone to be your master's professor, and you can work with them. You got to find your own funding. You can stick around, and it's pretty easy to get that master's degree if you want to do that. So I had been planning to do that, but really sort of not with like a super strong sense of direction. It was more like, I felt like there was more to learn and I didn't really have a better plan. So that's what I was going to do. But during my senior year, while I was, prepping for that path, I also started working part-time for the startup Case Place, which is actually where I ended up going to work. And uh, basically, they ended up offering me a full-time job at the end of the semester. And so, given that I hadn't been really concretely, excited about going to grad school, I decided that it was smarter for me to get a job that paid me working in operating systems engineering versus paying MIT to learn more about operating systems engineering. So super practical and, it seemed like an exciting opportunity. So that's basically how I got into startups. And this was a super small company the whole time I was there, varying between maybe 10 and 20 people. It was a bootstrapped company, so that means that they didn't raise venture capital funding. They had some grants. They won this startup competition at MIT called the 100K Startup Competition, which gave them some funding. And also the fact that they were doing some pretty cutting edge operating systems research meant that we were able to get some support from the Small Business Innovation Research Program, whatever it's called. So I was there for essentially 3 years. During that time, the company, grew, was sold to Oracle. The founder sold it to Oracle, and so I got to see a whole M&A process, a lot of diligence, and what it was like to integrate a company into a very large company. And I knew all the time that I wasn't going to stay at Oracle forever. The pace was slower than what I wanted, and it was a pretty comfortable job, but I really, I felt like if I stuck around there, I might never be able to get another job again. And also it was pretty boring. So I found myself spending a lot more time on my hobbies. This is the time when I got really into rock climbing. And I would say that having not too much to do at work allowed me to get really good at rock climbing quite quickly. But ultimately, you want to work on something that you're passionate about. And I didn't want to be somewhere where I was coasting for a long time. So I ended up leaving Oracle after 2 years, and that's when I started Nylas. And, the summary of why I started Nylas then is maybe two things. One is that it was a pretty good transitional point in my life to do something that seemed just totally wild, in that my previous startup had stuck around in the Boston area. So I didn't leave where I went to university. I just, got an apartment there and kept working and enjoyed that I could get to know the area a little bit more. MIT is sort of well known for being crushing in terms of its student workload. So I didn't really do a lot of things around Boston while I was a student. So it was nice to be able to get to know the area a bit more. But a lot of folks that I had known during that 3-year period that I was working there, people that I knew started dispersing to all over different places. And I kind of lost the solid community that I had in the area. So I felt like I would either need to double down and sort of make new friends in order to stay in Boston, or it was a good time for me to go somewhere else and try something new. And I was in my early 20s, so it seemed like a really sensible thing to do, to go explore the world and do something else, go somewhere else. And
I love that. The making it, like, framing it as sensible to make a big leap like that. That's awesome. And it's such a great time in one's life to really make those leaps and go try new things.
Yeah. And basically at that point in time, it was 2013, Silicon Valley and the Bay Area were really perceived as being the center of the world when it came to software and came to startups. So, I had a friend, another friend from MIT who had this idea about email, and it made sense to come to the Bay Area to start the company here. And I say here when I'm not there right now. I'm in Toronto, which is also a burgeoning place to start a tech company these days.
Yeah, and you opened an office in the last year there, so that's something cool as well.
Yeah, but in 2013, the Bay Area was far and away the number one place to start
sure.
a tech company. So that's why I ended up moving to the Bay and starting Nylas there. And it was very much a seed of an idea when we got started, and I didn't know if it would work or not. It was an exploration, and just started things kind of open-minded about this might work, this might not work, but let's see where it goes. And luckily I had a very frugal lifestyle and enough of a cushion from working at Oracle that I could afford to not get paid for a while. So just kind of showed up in the Bay and started working out of coffee shops and trying to figure out how to make an API that would make it easy to connect to email.
That's awesome. So I think at some point we'll want to talk a little bit more about the different phases the company's been through. But I think given that we'll probably want to close out and do some questions here in a second, I thought I'd just maybe, if we can maybe have a couple of kind of closing thoughts here. One is, okay, so fast forward, years later, it's, get through 2021, it's the second year of a pandemic. Any major themes or takeaways from you in terms of leading Nylas through that time? Any awesome stuff that you want to note that's happened, or any major challenges?
Yeah, for sure. It's been super interesting to me in that when the pandemic started, Nylas was about 50 people, give or take. And today we're 250, which sort of feels like the company was a caterpillar that went into this cocoon and you couldn't see what was going on in there for a while. And then 2 years later, out comes this juvenile butterfly. And just a lot has changed in the company over those 2 years. And I think early on we decided that, hey, this thing is probably not going to resolve super fast, and we're already pretty remote friendly. So we decided to double down on being remote first. And so it's been a huge highlight and kind of a core piece of growing the company that, we essentially went from being US only in that time to, like I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, we're now in, I think, 4 countries, 21 states in the US, and just really have people that are more and more so growing, all over the world. Other things that I think are really worth highlighting, one thing that's happened in the past year is that we have 3 longtime employees at Nylas who have grown their roles to become VPs at the company, in marketing, in talent, and in product. And that's one thing that I didn't know when I was starting this thing, how amazingly satisfying it would be to have people that, joined. One of the great things about joining a startup is that, when the company's very small, you can start doing a job that you don't necessarily have a ton of experience doing that thing, because at the early stages of being a startup, the most important thing is to have a growth mindset, be able to learn quickly and iterate.
The execution, right?
Yeah, most people who are building the first phase of a product at a startup are not the best engineers in the world. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way, but just to say that the qualities that are most important at a startup are not necessarily we're building the most scalable, reliable software. The point is to find, product market fit quickly.
Yeah.
And so the best at a startup means something different. Anytime you have an organization that doesn't have much to lose, there's much more to win from taking risks. And so that applies to people as well. And so at a small company at Nylas, we've been able to take bets on people who have stepped up and been able to take on more and more responsibility as the company has grown. And it's just super meaningful to me to see that happen over time. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, yeah, so certainly my boss is one of them, Tasha, VP of Marketing. But
Yeah,
I got
she's
to interact.
amazing, right?
Yeah, I got to interact with Mikey as part of the interview process as well, and he's, I believe, VP of Product. And so that's really awesome to see that, and I'm sure that's a great feeling. I've had some small share of that as a people leader on previous teams as well, where it's been, just nice to be able to bring someone on into a new sort of world and help them progress. So what a cool thing. I think the last thing I'll want to close with then is like, we won't go too deep into predictions. Maybe we'll have that as another topic for another time, maybe early in the year.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on it, so probably
what on the predictions?
Could talk for a whole hour about just that.
I want to. So yes, why not right now? If nothing else, like maybe you can call it a general theme or whatever else for your predictions. I kind of was inferring a few things from like reading what you were writing in the blog post, which we'll share out as part of this video. But yeah, like just maybe a general theme, or maybe just pick one that you just want to have some closing thoughts on here before we jump over to any questions.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that is maybe a little bit out of left field, but I've been thinking a lot about what products Nylas is working on, either launching or continuing to iterate on and expand upon in 2022. And typically when you launch a new thing, like it takes a while to get that adoption up and to iterate towards exactly the right form of that product. And today, Nylas as a platform, we sell alongside developers. The developer is usually our internal champion. Maybe the person who's signing the invoice is someone else and authorizing that purchase, but developers are who really see the value out of Nylas and who really advocate for bringing Nylas into a business. In the future, more and more so in 2022, but also beyond, there's going to be more personas who are the ones who are the champions behind bringing in what used to be developer platforms, but now more and more are becoming automation platforms. Those might be people like data scientists or data analysts, more kind of business-oriented users, whether those people are product managers or marketing people. Folks that at the end of the day, they have things that they want to get done for the business that they're more and more able to do directly with the help of tools and infrastructure such as Nylas. Whereas in sort of the old world order, everything involved, you had to, work with an engineering team, get it put on a sprint, develop the roadmap in order to launch that. And we're kind of in this nascent phase of that right now. And I think it's only going to get sort of hotter and hotter, especially given that the labor market's so tight for engineering. And it just makes sense. It's more empowering for all these users to be able to sort of directly create what they want than to have to, go through a long process in order to do it. They can iterate more quickly. And I think it's just good for all sorts of people in all sorts of different roles to get the power of software because it allows you to do so much.
Absolutely. And I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but certainly those kinds of like those ways in as well. Like some people will get their job done. Plenty of people get their job done at that level. But I love this notion of like the progressive disclosure of the tech stack, where you really start with those like pieces of automation, but some folks will decide to go a little bit deeper and then a little bit deeper. And before they know it, they're building really cool stuff. So it can also change the trajectories of their own lives in interesting ways. But whether it's folks that are able to just like do more because of these automation options, or again, like to even start to dig deeper into the tech side of things over time. I'm really interested to see where that's going to go. And I can't wait to have a moment where you and I can chat at a bit deeper level on this topic alone.
Yeah, sounds super fun.
Cool. So this is the part where let's just see if we have any questions that we want to get to. Daniela, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to ask you about this or where the questions are.
We did have one question that came in earlier. I don't know if you can find the Q&A functionality, but Alvaro asked a question: where does Nylas, the name Nylas, come from? And
Yeah. Hey,
I'm happy.
Alvaro. By the way, Alvaro goes by Blag. He's going to be on the team pretty soon.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to Nylas in advance. And I'm happy to answer that question. This company was originally from the very beginning called Inbox, just like a mailbox. And this made sense at the time in that we started out as being APIs for accessing mailbox data. So, it's essentially, accessing an inbox. But it turned out this was a very bad name because you cannot trademark words, generic words in the same context that they're used in. So for example, you can have Apple computer and you can trademark that, you can protect it with lawyers, but you can't name an orchard, Apple orchard, and then expect that to be something that would stand up in court if someone else named themselves Apple orchard too. Basically, Google launched an email client called Inbox in, I think, 2014, something like that, in the very early days of the company. And we called up our lawyers and they said, this is perhaps the very worst name you could have picked to name this company, and there's nothing you can do about it. We decided that we couldn't compete with Google for SEO for obvious reasons. And we had to change the name, like stat, on short notice, ASAP. So we ended up actually hiring some folks who do brand design to help us come up with options for what we could change our name to. And, the criteria we had were, is something that is pronounceable, sounds pretty good, is a unique sort of word space and something that we could get the .com for. And also that just, sounded, like professional, like something that could be enterprise quality in the long run. Nylas is what we landed on. It was actually originally spelled with an I, so Nilas. So fun fact, we've not only changed our name once, we changed our name twice. First from Inbox to Nylas with an I. And then we launched that, and it was a bit of an ordeal because, you have to go and search and replace in all the code base and redo the logos and the website and all that fun stuff. As a platform, we also implement an OAuth flow. So that was really tricky because we had to make sure that all of the redirect URLs that our customers were using didn't break as a part of this domain name change. And of course, the first time we did the change, we broke it. And luckily, that's not as bad when you're a tiny startup as it is when you're a much bigger company. But we had to scramble to fix that. And then we were live for about 1 month. And we just realized that no one could pronounce our name. They thought it was Nylas or Nylas. One of those core criteria that we had was just failing. Like, people can't pronounce it. So we made the executive decision to replace the I with a Y, and the rest is history. The word Nylas, spelled with an I, is a word that means a kind of ice that forms on the surface of the ocean. And the nice metaphor to tie this to the Nylas platform was that icebergs, there's, not a lot you can see on the surface, but down below the surface, they may be quite large and like have a lot more mass than is actually visible above the surface. And so Nylas, the platform, abstracts away a ton of complexity of connecting to, at the time it was just email, but today it's all of communications data. And we're the tip of the iceberg, the interface through which a lot of complexity is hidden. And so this is kind of like the bonus criteria, which is, there's a nice metaphor behind the scenes that is a good story. And we've put this iceberg with all of the complexity of communications data in a lot of fundraising slide decks and things like that, which has been fun.
Wow, TIL. We'll just have to have like this piece of this video for folks that are joining the company. They can go learn the etymology
Yeah.
of the name. And I'm
I
just
really want to have a comic form of this in our onboarding guide, and I have provided the marketing or the people team, the people experience. So I gave somebody like a script word for word of what it should be like. So you guys can make that if you want it.
storyboarding is, I think, the next. Isn't that how that works? Now we just gotta, yeah, we'll do the
We had to
manga
get big
version.
enough to have, the ability to hire a comic artist.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, like somebody drew our faces. I don't know where that came from, but like, yeah, we're cartoons now already, so
Yeah,
we seem to have that
we
muscle
should
somewhere.
build on that.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's really cool, and I just want to say thank you for renaming the company twice before I joined, so I don't have to go through all that. I'm sure that was like a really hard thing to go through.
Yeah, this
And
one seems to have staying power. We're at like 6+ years at this point, and so I sincerely hope there's never a reason to rename this company again.
Me too. Let's stick with it. Bigger fish to fry, but that's awesome.
Yeah, we have a lot of brand equity in this name at this point, so let's not start from scratch.
Well, I want to say thanks to Alvaro for sharing the question. Can't wait till you're joining our DevRel team. He'll actually be our first developer advocate. So I think it's awesome that he knows that story as well. So Spang, thanks for sharing. I don't know if there's any final housekeeping, Daniela, that I need to do, but I just want to say again that, like, for anyone still watching, if you want to, follow us on Twitter, Spang, you are at Spang. I'm at @Ryan_IO. And other than that, go check us out. Whether, head over to Nylas.com, you can sign up for a free trial right there. And at the same time, you can also go check out our careers page. I'm just going to say it one more time, but I'm hiring. And just to be nice to everyone else in the company, lots of other people are hiring too. I think we've got roles open for engineering and I don't want to take a wild guess. So as a matter of fact, just go check it out.
Yeah, there's a lot of jobs on that page.
A lot of jobs on that page. Yeah. So anyways, come join us. And Spang, I just want to say thank you for taking an hour out of your day to sit down and chat with me. I had a lot of fun, and hopefully you did as well.
Yeah, for sure. Myself as well. And to everyone who's tuning in or listening to this later, I want to make these as interactive as possible. So if you have questions, please do, show up, submit them. And if there's like things that you want to hear about, feel free to tweet at me. I love connecting with people and talking about what we're doing here at Nylas or just technology in general. You've probably seen from me sharing some of my story that I'm just a huge nerd over here. So I love meeting people. And, one of the benefits of doing kind of broadcast things like this is that, you get like a bit more of an in-depth introduction to me. And then, you can reach out and chat more about whatever pieces stood out to you or that, you wanted to follow up on. So I love hearing from folks.
Going. Yeah, this is awesome. All right, Spang. Well, thanks. And happy travels in Toronto. Have a great time with your family, but also with the extended Nylas team out in Toronto. Have a great holiday party and we'll chat soon.
Sounds good.
All right. Bye.